Well, I was thinking about, one of the things that you did other than like catch rum runners, right? Was
that was the big thing back in those days.
It wasn't drugs so much as
I was on the ship from 54 to 59, 1954 to 1959, and we didn't have the drug traffic like they do nowadays. And in the thing, there was more rum runners that would run the rum up and bring it into the States without paying any taxes on it.
Yeah.
And we would go out and chase them, or we were an air and sea rescue unit too.
Right.
So if a plane went down, we had to go out and search with it no matter what. And out of the 4 years that I was on that ship, we never picked up one body out of all the plane wrecks that we went on. We found oil slicks. We found a few items, but you don't find nothing, hardly anything at all.
Yeah.
When a small plane, and if there's anything else around, the sharks would take care of everything else.
Right.
And but
you also went into hurricanes, right?
When the Coast Guard at that time, depending on now, we never did have a 5 or a 4 or something like that. But if you were we couldn't stay tied up at the dock. We had to go out to sea in case we were needed. But we usually stayed on the outskirts of it, trying to find, on the outskirts one way or the other. They'd send us up north if it was coming up, or else they'd send us down south if it was coming in. But a couple of times we got we got distress calls from a shrimp boat one night, and we went to and we couldn't understand them because they were Hispanic, and they couldn't speak English. But we heard their Mayday, and so we went in, and we had to go into the storm, which was probably 10 to 12-foot waves and stuff like that, that we were in, and it was pretty windy and everything else. And then we went out and we found them. But then once you find them, then you have to get we had a 9-inch hawser that was all rope, made out of hemp. And then it had a great big, huge metal eye in it where they could get it over and hook it on to one of their, and I can't use that word, what they called it, but it was back in the old days.
You'd hook your hawser up to the boat that you were...
The big eye, it was like an anvil, but it's got 2 pointed things on it, and you see them on a ship, and they're long, they're bolted to the deck. They got long things on them, and they either run sideways or they run back and forth.
It's almost like
hook that eye over the top.
It's almost like a set of horns.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
But they had a word that we can't use.
Yeah, well, anyway.
And so they ended up, but to get that over there, you had a rifle that had a rod that went down into the barrel, and it had a tip on it that looked like an iron round cone, like that. It just ran like this. It was about 7 inches long, and it was a solid piece of metal with a round top on it there. And it was hooked to that metal rod. And hooked to that was a nylon cord that was fairly small, about, I don't know, maybe 1/4 of an inch or more. And it was hooked to the eye of tied to the eye of the hawser. And then you would go by, you had to, what you did was you'd circle the ship that was on, that you were going to try to rescue, because you would try to break down the waves so that you wouldn't be going like this with them trying to get that on there. But you still did do some of that.
Right.
And so the young man that was shooting the rifle to try to get the thing over there, and you can retrieve it, so we got it back, and he missed 2 times. And finally, the old man, the captain of the ship, he said, "Heron," he said, "come here." He said, "Can you put that thing over there?" And these guys were inside their cabin where the wheel is, the steering wheel, and it was glass in front. Mm-hmm. And so I told him, I said, "Well, Captain, I'll just do the best job I can." He said, "Okay." And so I went out there on the deck out there where you get wet and everything else, and that's where the blinker light was and everything else, and which I had to learn to do those, and which I wasn't very good at, but because by then we had radios. And so I was sitting there, and so we come by real close this time. The old man brought her real close, and I fired that sucker off, and it went right through that front window on that thing, and they scattered out of there.
Like right through the captain's cabin?
Went right through the glass on the front of where the steering wheel was. That was the only dry place they had. And it wasn't dry after that. And that thing went right through that window, and the old man said, "Good shot." Just as deadpan as you could imagine. And he said that, but I'm telling you right now, there was only 3 guys on that shrimp boat, and those guys pulled that 9-inch hawser through that water. And I mean, when you're scared, you can do a lot more than you think you can. Mm. And they hooked that baby on, and then when you're in a hurricane, it goes counterclockwise. So what you do is you put the waves off of your port stern, and then that carries you, and then you go around, and that carries you out of the circle. I mean, out of the hurricane. Mm-hmm. And when you're in like I told you one time before, when you're in the eye of the hurricane, the sun's shining, there's no wind, and it's clear.
Mm. That's amazing.
It's an amazing story. Mm. And then we towed them out and got them thing. Yeah. And then
so it'd been fun to hear what they had to say about that.
Whatever they said, we had one guy that could speak a little Spanish, and what they wanted immediately was coffee and something to eat. Coffee was their main thing. And we did the same thing with another shrimpers that they lost their motor. And we went out and rescued them in a light storm. It wasn't in a hurricane, it was in a light storm. And they were, the thing about this one is they were from the islands off of South Carolina, and they're called Geechees. Mm. And they speak a different language than it's an old time, I think, English language.
I've heard that because when I was out there.
And
we can't understand them.
No, we picked them up, and they were soaking wet, and they had actually tore up some of the deck and was burning it to keep warm because it was cold. And we saw that one of the guys that was up in the crow's nest, that was one thing I never did tell you. I only went up there once, and they never got me back up there again because I got scared, and I hung on. The chief had to come up and get me down. Mm. And but I made that, and he saw a fire. He said, "I see a fire." And they said, "You can't see no fire out here." He said, "Yeah, I do." And we went over there, and that was them, and we picked them up. And we couldn't talk, and we had one guy, that same engineman that made me wash off my tattoo every day. Mm-hmm. He was from either North Carolina or South Carolina. I don't know which one it is, but he could understand just a tad bit of it. And the first thing those guys wanted, they wanted all the coffee they could drink, as strong as they could make it. We could make it.